I'm Melody Rose, City Club President, and I would like to welcome you all to the beginning of debate season. Those of you who are able to join us today at the Governor Hotel, and of course those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, and of course those of you watching on Portland Community Media CityNet 30. Thank you for joining City Club today, Friday, October 7th, for this week's forum. In consideration of those sitting close to you and the candidates and those on our radio and television audiences, I ask you to please silence your cell phones and everything else in your pockets that jingles. Today, we will hear from 3 candidates competing to represent the Democrats in the 1st Congressional District primary election: Brad Avakian, Suzanne Bonamici, and Brad Witt. But first, some announcements. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and extend our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors. Please join me in offering our sincerest thanks to the fall quarter sponsors AARP Oregon, Baron Liebman, and PGE. We are very grateful to you. And we very much appreciate your commitment to the City Club mission. If your company or firm would like to join this group in supporting the mission through sponsorship, I invite you to please see our friendly City Club staff at the back of the room or give us a call at the City Club office. City Club hosts intelligent and civil presentations and dialogues about the most challenging issues of our time. In an era of 30-second sound bites, this in-depth discussion of today's pressing issues is needed now more than ever. If you value the quality programming and influential research that inspires citizens to be informed and to be involved, please give generously to our annual fund. You can donate using one of the envelopes on your lunch table or via the City Club website, pdxcityclub.org. And thank you in advance for your generosity. And now to introduce our moderator. Today's moderator is Jim Westwood. Jim is a partner at the law firm of Stoll Reeves, where he concentrates his practice in state and federal appellate courts. He has handled important appeals in state and federal constitutional law, insurance, banking, and energy. Jim?
Thanks very much, Melody. I am Jim Westwood. It is my privilege and honor to be the moderator of a debate today that I think is going to be very, not only entertaining, but informative as well. The 3 candidates are 3 out of 8 registered candidates for this office. City Club, of course, has to make the cutoff somewhere. And let me tell you, if we had an 8-candidate debate, I could never handle it. It'll be hard enough doing 3. Please bear with me today. Any follow-ups I will take full blame for and responsibility. But today we have the 3 candidates, Brad Avakian, Suzanne Bonamici, and Brad Witt here. And let me go through the debate format for you very briefly. It'll have several sections. First, each candidate in turn will give a 3-minute opening statement in an order that's previously been determined. Following the opening statements, the candidates will then respond to questions that have been written in advance for this meeting by City Club's Friday Forum Committee and City Club staff. These are the only questions that will be asked of the candidates by outsiders today. There will be no questions from the floor. You can see there are no microphones on the floor, so sorry about that. Maybe later in a different forum. We will also rely on the judgment of a distinguished panel of 3 City Club members seated in front of me here to decide whether or not they believe the candidate has indeed answered a given question. If 2 or more of these 3 esteemed panel's members raise their question mark cards, would you please raise them so people will see what they look like, everyone? If 2 or more members of the panel raise their question mark cards at the close of the answer to a question, then I will ask the question again, because their opinion is that the candidate has not fully answered the question. I'll ask it again, and the candidate, rather than having the 60 seconds allotted first, will now have 45 seconds to do a redo. So you get a mulligan, candidates. Our panel is Joyce DeMonin, Elizabeth Friedenwald, and Promise King. And keeping time and counting for knockdowns at the bell is City Club staff member Tony Iacarino. Following the City Club questions, each candidate has the opportunity then to ask one, or time permitting, and we'll announce that if it does, two questions of their fellow debaters. And after this rotation of questions, each candidate then will make a 2-minute closing and we'll be done. Now, I know there are supporters of all three candidates in the audience today. I would ask that no matter how great a soundbite sounds or how much you really want that person to feel your support, please withhold your applause today. In keeping with the Oregon tradition, I ask that you mail it in. So now let me, before they come up, introduce briefly the three candidates for you. This is the order in which they will be initially speaking, incidentally. Brad Witt, the first person you'll hear from, served for many years as a union representative in the seafood, grocery, and forest industries businesses. He was elected Secretary-Treasurer of the Oregon AFL-CIO and served from 1991 to 2005 in that position. He currently works as a union representative for the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 555. Mr. Witt began his political career in 2005 when he was appointed to the position he currently holds in the Oregon House of Representatives, representing District 31, which runs basically from just this side of Astoria to Sauvie Island, I think. So it's the Columbia River, Columbia County as well. Clatsop, Columbia, part of Multnomah County. He has since been reelected to this seat 3 times. Suzanne Bonamici, our second candidate debater. After graduating from law school at the University of Oregon, Ms. Bonamici worked as a consumer protection attorney for the Federal Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. And then she returned to Oregon and entered private practice. She began working as a legislative assistant at the Oregon House of Representatives in 2001, and then in 2006, she ran in her own right and was elected to serve House District 34, covering much of Washington County. After one term in the Oregon House, she was first appointed and then elected to the Oregon Senate in 2008, and then 2 years later, elected to a full 4-year term. Brad Avakian, today's third debater, went to law school at Lewis & Clark, while also working as the manager of the YMCA Juvenile Restitution Program in Portland. After completing his law degree, Mr. Avakian went into private law practice, and during that time, he was a co-founder of both the Southwest Music School and the Washington County chapter of the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. Not sure how the connection is, but he's a man of many talents. He was first elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 2002. Mr. Avakian then won election to the Oregon State Senate in 2006, and 2 years later, he left that position when he was elected to his current position as Commissioner of the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. So now, without further ado, if I may please ask the candidates to come to the podiums, we'll begin the opening statements and the questioning. Mr. Witt, I believe you have the floor first, and you will have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank each and every one of you here this afternoon for the opportunity to present my candidacy for Oregon's 1st Congressional District. I'm Brad Witt, and a 4-term state legislator, and I'm running for Oregon's 1st Congressional District to be the voice and advocate for my constituents, the rest of Oregon, and much of our nation, for those things that will make a positive difference in these people's everyday lives. Things like good jobs that will get Americans back to work, a clean and healthy environment that will guarantee Oregon continues to be the special place that it is, an education system that is second to none, that provides rewarding careers for our students and global competitiveness for our employers, a woman's right to choose because it is her right and it is her choice, a financially solid Social Security and Medicare system that guarantees benefits to those who have earned them over a lifetime of work, and last but certainly not least, an end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to get us back on track to world peace and a balanced budget. After 3.5 years of the worst recession in the post-war period, I am convinced that the only way that we get back to prosperity is to create more good jobs. My Rebuild America program is a call to action to invest now in the upgrade and modernization of our nation's key infrastructure, energy transmission and generation capacities, so that we will have the smartest grid in the world, our multimodal transportation system, so that we can get our economy back up and running, our communications network, so that every community, including my own, will have access to high-speed internet, and public buildings that will begin to save energy and taxpayer dollars through new efficiencies. By creating the world's most modern and efficient facilities, we will put Americans back to work, rebuild our nation's infrastructure, and put our economy back on track. These are the issues that Oregonians want addressed. These are the issues that will make a positive difference in their everyday lives. And these are the issues for which I want to be your voice and your advocate as Oregon's next Congressman. Thank you.
Our second candidate to speak will be Suzanne Bonamici. Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Bonamici, and I'm running for Congress. You know, when I say that out loud, I think about my grandparents. What would it be like for them to hear their granddaughter say these words? Years ago, they came over on a boat from Italy through Ellis Island, looking for a better life. My parents and my grandparents kept it simple. Work hard, play by the rules, and never be afraid to do the right thing. And those values are a big part of the reason why I'm running for Congress. And I've lived those values through the choices that I've made in my life, working at legal aid to help families who were in financial trouble because they lost a job or lost a spouse or had medical bills that they couldn't pay. Working as a consumer protection attorney at the Federal Trade Commission, where I stood up to mortgage companies and their fraudulent practices when they were causing families to lose their homes. I took them on, and they were held accountable for their actions. Back home in Oregon, I helped small business owners who were taken advantage of by corporations who misled them. I represented a small business owner against a big oil company, ensuring that he didn't lose the life savings that he had earned and invested. And as a legislator, I'm proud to be known as someone who stands up for consumers, small businesses, middle-class families, and those who are struggling to get ahead, fighting for opportunity in a fair playing field, defending and strengthening public education, making it easier for small businesses to access the capital they need to survive and thrive and grow jobs here in Oregon. And I'm proud that my work has been recognized. The Oregon League of Conservation Voters gave me the Protector of Public Health Award for my legislation to reduce pesticide use in schools. And in endorsing me for Congress, the Oregon Nurses Association said that I've been an effective leader, not just as a legislator, but as someone who stood up for families her entire career. And earlier this year, I appreciated the Willamette Week survey of area legislators. They gave me the highest score for integrity. That matters to me a lot. So I want to tell you two things. First, I'm running to help restore these values and priorities to a Congress that seems to have forgotten them, to focus on creating jobs, putting people back to work, helping small businesses, and rebuilding our communities, to keep our promises to seniors on the Social Security and Medicare they've earned through a lifetime of hard work, and to strengthen our public schools, pre-K through college. And second, I'll bring this guiding principle to Congress. Restore opportunity for those who work hard and play by the rules, and hold accountable those who don't, no matter how powerful they are. That's the America my grandparents crossed an ocean for. That's the America our children and grandchildren deserve to have passed down to them, and that's why I'm running for Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Avakian.
Thank you. I'm not a guy that likes spinning his wheels. When it comes to the issues that are important to the people of Northwest Oregon, I take action with conviction, and I get the job done. Right now, Northwest Oregon needs a leader in Congress that can get the job done, putting our people back to work. You know, we've got 30 million people in this country right now. that aren't working enough hours to make ends meet at home. And that's why I'm proposing a 21st century WPA program. Let's get back to work rebuilding our bridges and our roads, retrofitting our buildings with new green technology, and let's start with a new smart electrical grid for the country. And I'll be a leader that gets the job done, protecting our Social Security, our Medicare, our Medicaid, and the social safety net. You know, it wasn't long ago, I met a woman in Washington County at her doorstep that taught me a lot about how important that is. As I walked up to her doorstep, she had 2 small kids playing in the front yard, tattered shorts, shaven heads, distended bellies, the kind of thing that you'd see in a third world country. And as I talked to her, I started talking about education and the economy, and it was clear to me very quickly that's not where she was at. So we talked about her kids and we talked about her family. And I said goodbye and started to turn, and she said to me, "Do you know what I really need?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "I need something to eat." So I went straight back to my office and called the food bank to make sure that that family was taken care of. But right here in Oregon, I will do what it takes to protect those programs that provide the social safety net. And I'll take action on progressive principles. I say bring the troops home right now, no delay. Repeal the No Child Left Behind Act that's pitting school against school instead of lifting up every school to equal success. And let's be the country of justice and equality that we claim to be, and finally provide marriage equality for all. I spent my career as a civil rights lawyer right here in Northwest Oregon fighting for people who had suffered injustice. In fact, Debbie and I both grew up here. We met at Aloha High School in Tom Hughes' civics class, and we raised our son and daughter here. In the State House and the State Senate, I took action on progressive ideas, passing the Oregon Renewable Energy Act, which has made us a national leader in green jobs, the first expansion of Oregon's bottle bill in nearly 40 years, the bill kicking abusive payday lenders who were charging 500% interest out of the state of Oregon, and as your labor commissioner, the bill that next year will begin the restoration of shop classes to our middle schools and high schools. From the small things to the big, I've always rolled up my sleeves, worked hard, and gotten the job done for you, and I'll get the job done for you in Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Avakian. Now that the candidates have introduced themselves to us, we'll move to the portion of the program where I ask the questions that have been prepared by the Friday Forum Committee and the City Club staff. Let me say that the candidates have not seen these questions in advance. All of today's questions will be responded to by each candidate. When I ask a question, the first candidate that I select, and the first question is going to you, Ms. Bonamici, so be ready. The first responder has 60 seconds, and then in turn, Mr. Avakian and Mr. Witt, in that order, you will also have 60 seconds to respond to the same question. Remember, we have the umpires here who may or may not hold up question marks at the end of your answer. So, Ms. Bonamici, first question to you. Most Americans seem to think that Congress these days is pretty much dysfunctional. Both parties appear to many people to be interested in positioning for the next election rather than in governing and doing what's in the public interest. Some new polls suggest that only 11% of Americans, the lowest percentage ever, have confidence in Congress. Some speculate it would take a third party or even a revolution to change this culture in Washington. So the question, in your opinion, what could turn this situation around?
What could turn this situation around is having a representative for the 1st Congressional District who has a record of accomplishment, a record of getting things done, and a record of being able to accomplish things even in challenging situations. I have that record that I've built throughout my career. I'm not afraid to take on a challenge, but I also can approach a problem in a collaborative way and work across the aisle when necessary without sacrificing the values which I have brought to the table. And the most recent example of that is when the Senate President just assigned me to chair the Senate Redistricting Committee. We defied the skeptics. A lot of people said that couldn't be done. It's a political process, and it can be very contentious. But I led the effort. We traveled around the state, and we got the work done in the legislature and defied the skeptics and saved the state the uncertainty and the money. So what we need uncertainty and money of having that not done in the legislature. What we need is an effective leader, and I'll bring that to Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Avakian, you have up to 60 seconds for your response.
Thank you for the question. You know, to adequately respond, we have to take a very quick look at why it's that way in Congress, because Congress is broken right now. But the reason is that after the November elections, there's nobody back there that flips the light switch off on the campaigns and then turns to relationship building and governing anymore. So any solution has got to start with serious campaign finance reform. After that, it's very important to be able to build the relationships in order to move progressive legislation forward. My last year in the legislature, I was selected by the League of Conservation Voters as the Consensus Builder of the Year. I know how to bring diverse groups and move them forward. But you also have to know when that cannot be done and be ready to throw the knockout punch and just win the day. And on the important progressive issues that America wants, we have got to have a leader that is ready to go to Congress and win the day on those issues.
Mr. Witt?
I believe that my experience and credentials as a professional negotiator will help to break the political gridlock back in Congress in Washington, D.C. Each and every day as a negotiator, I have to bring agreement where before there was only disagreement. And my final product is a contract that has to be voted on. So that judgment is passed by literally thousands of people, whether I did a good job or not. In the legislature, I reach across the aisle on a regular basis to deal with my counterparts on the other side of the aisle. And in fact, in the just completed legislative session, I'm proud to say that I reached more agreements than any other member of my caucus. It is these kinds of values and talents and experience that are needed in Washington, D.C., and I will use that political experience to break the gridlock.
No question marks yet. You're doing great, candidates. This next question will be first from Mr. Avakian, followed by Mr. Witt and Ms. Bonamici. Although Oregon's 1st Congressional District in 2013 will no longer comprise downtown Portland's business district as it does now, it will indeed include Washington County's powerhouse companies like Intel and Nike, and who knows what else is coming in Silicon Forest. So, as a freshman representative in what may well be the minority party in 2013, what committee assignments do you hope for, and how will that representation benefit your district's businesses and their contributions to Oregon's economy?
Thank you for the question. The 1st Congressional District in many ways is really the economic engine for the state of Oregon, with great companies like Nike and Intel and Columbia Sportswear and others, and having a relationship with them is very, very important. My role as Commissioner of Labor and Industries has put me in a terrific position for the Labor and Education Committee. My work in Oregon in improving public education by repealing the SIM-CAM, by restoring the shop classes, by helping boost the budget for public education, and my work in job training and protecting Oregon's workers as Commissioner of Labor and Industries makes me a great fit for that committee. The other is the Energy Committee. In 2007, I had the pleasure of bringing together a very diverse group to pass the Oregon Renewable Energy Act, which has made us a leader in green jobs. That kind of experience and the ability to get the job done makes the Energy Committee a terrific fit as well.
Just one question mark. We'll go ahead with Mr. Witt. No, Mr. Witt, you may go ahead.
Well, thank you. The committee that I would like to be appointed to would be the Energy and Commerce Committee. This committee is absolutely critical to Oregon's economic future, and I would like to be appointed as well to the Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade. So much of Oregon's economy, up to a third of it, is based on commerce that is involved with international trade. Critically important not only to our present economic state, but also to bring revitalization and future growth to our state. As well, the environment portion of that committee is critically important to maintaining Oregon as the very special place that those of us who are Oregonians know it to be. I would be pleased to serve on that committee.
Ms. Bonamici.
candidate who's been traveling around the district and representing a good portion of the district in the state legislature, I know the importance of education issues to people who live in the district and work in the district. And I am very certain that changes need to be made that are important to the district in the Education Committee. I have made changes at the state level because I'm reducing mandates, and I know that those changes are made because of No Child Left Behind. I want to work very hard on significantly changing No Child Left Behind so that we have a strong system of public education. I've also been out talking to the business community, and I know the importance of intellectual property rights, things like trademark, copyright, and I want to work on the Judiciary Committee to make sure that our businesses are well represented back in Congress. Thank you.
This next question goes first to Mr. Witt, followed by Ms. Bonamici. On the heels of Governor Kitzhaber's trade mission to Asia, and following your debate in front of the Oregon AFL-CIO, an Oregonian editorial slammed each of you for failing to support free trade and for, and I quote, kissing up to the unions. Given that annual free trade accounts for about $1.8 billion in the district that you hope to represent, how would you respond to the Oregonians' charges that you don't support free trade and that you're too eager to please unions? Mr. Witt?
Trade is absolutely critical to Oregon's economy. Up to a third of it, directly or indirectly, is based on trade. I, however, think that it is absolutely critically important that we base our state's trade policies on fair trade and not just free trade. It is fundamentally critical that we as a state and a nation be able to play on a level playing field, that the protections that we place in this country not disadvantage us vis-a-vis our protections for workers and those who shouldn't be working, children, our environment, as well as our protections for consumers. We need to level the playing field. That will in no way diminish the amount of trade or the dollar value that is derived from that, and that is the only way that we can prevent Oregon from losing more than the 60,000 jobs that it has already lost.
Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Jim. I'm glad you asked this question. You absolutely can't have a discussion about jobs in the 1st District without talking about trade. And I recognize the importance of trade to the business community, and I appreciate the concerns raised by workers about the impact of trade agreements. And I have been clear where I stand, and I've been consistent on this issue regardless of whom I'm speaking to. Here's some of the criteria that I would use to analyze whether a trade issue that comes before me in Congress. First, does it create or save jobs in the 1st Congressional District? And I can tell you there's a lack of good information about how particular trade agreements impact jobs in the 1st District and in Oregon. What are the provisions for labor rights, for environmental rights, and for human rights? And I will not surrender my ability to advocate effectively by making a blanket promise in a campaign to vote yes or no on a certain trade proposal. Doing so removes any leverage that I might have to work for the best possible deal to represent the 1st Congressional District.
Mr. Avakian.
Thank you. Well, let's be clear about one thing first. My opinion on trade is not based on what the labor unions think, what the governor thinks, what anybody else thinks. It's based on what the workers in my district need. And I will say no to any trade agreement that takes jobs away from American workers and ships them overseas. The 1st Congressional District is 7th among the 435 congressional districts in how many jobs it loses. Nearly 20,000 have been lost to China already because of the trade deficits with that country. Allowing other countries to abuse workers, to refuse basic environmental protections, to get their goods into our market with cheap tariffs while we cannot do the same to their markets is killing us. And any trade agreement that puts us in an inferior position to another will not receive my support.
We're on to the next question, and Ms. Bonamici, you're up first, followed by Mr. Avakian. All three of you appear to support the current plan for building the Columbia River crossing, despite its $3 billion cost and what has been called its pie-in-the-sky finance plan. So, given the state of the American economy, the size of the debt, and the growing mood in Congress to cut domestic spending, What makes you believe that a federal appropriation of the magnitude required for this project will happen?
Thank you. I do believe that we need a new bridge over the Columbia River, but we need greater accountability going forward. And that hasn't been there. And I tell you that so much money has been spent, we don't have much to show for it, is really a concern to people. And as as the current members of the Oregon delegation have said, it's going to be very important to have good cost information. It's not going to be easy to get funding for a project now. If we don't have more accountability, we won't get the project. We do need a bridge, we do need the jobs, but going forward, we need more accountability.
Mr. Avakian.
I appreciate the question. I am convinced the bridge needs to be built. It ought to be built now. We've got folks out of work that need the jobs. Your question is, can it really be done? Can you get the money? I got to tell you, I'm an optimist. The money's going to go somewhere in this country. Why not to Oregon and putting the 200,000 people that we have out of work back to work? The trick is being able to go back there, build the kind of relationships you need to build in order to get that kind of revenue back to the state. I don't have any illusions that going back as a freshman member out of 435, we change the culture of Washington, D.C. overnight and get that done. But I tell you, we have a strong and respected delegation that as a team can get it done. And I think I have just the skills in building the kind of relationships that are necessary to lend a hand to that team to get the money back here to Oregon.
Mr. Witt.
Building the Columbia River crossing is absolutely critical to our state's and region's future, both in terms of our economy as well as our ability to move commerce and people throughout the region. That bridge needs to be built. We need to set it as a priority. And one of the priorities is finding a way to pay for it. The infrastructure program that I described earlier in my opening statement would cost on the order of $2 trillion. We can fund the entire program, not just the bridge, but our energy infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure, our communications infrastructure, and all the public buildings in this nation that need to be funded by ending the Bush tax cuts and investing that money now in America's infrastructure, so that by the end of the decade, our nation has the most modern and efficient transportation and all the other infrastructures of any nation in the world.
Avakian is for you, followed by Mr. Witt. The nation's current annual deficit, that is the gap between expenditures and revenues, is $1.3 trillion. Congress and the administration can potentially close this gap with a combination of budget cuts and tax increases. If you are elected, what combination of cuts and taxes would you support?
Well, I appreciate the question. We box ourselves into answers sometimes thinking that you need to cut critical programs, and now Social Security is on the table, and where in the world does that come from? One of the greatest safety nets we have. Let's take a look at how to use the money we have now more efficiently. We've spent $1 trillion on 3 overseas conflicts, billions and billions of more ahead of us with no end in sight. When I say end the wars now, I mean end them now, bring our troops home, and reinvest that money in the ways we need to get that budget balanced. The other is, I think that we have got to end the Bush tax cuts for the highest 2% in the country. And the other thing that I would do is I would start auditing the defense budget the way we audit all other budgets for the federal agencies, find the efficiencies there. You do just those 3 things, cuts, efficiencies, adjusting the revenue like I suggested, and you get yourself a balanced budget.
Let's see, the next one is Mr. Witt, right?
You described in your question the traditional approaches to dealing with an economic downturn, and in this instance, a deficit as well. Cutting programs or budget cuts and increasing taxes. And the truth of the matter is that our nation and our state can neither tax nor cut its way back to prosperity. The only way that we get there is to create more jobs so that we create more revenue, to not only be able to have our consumers be able to participate in the economy, but also to provide that revenue that's critical to all government funding. I would use as a down payment the money that we spend on Iraq and Afghanistan. which is about a tenth of the cost of or the total of our nation's deficit, as a down payment, 10% right off the top, and then use the increasing revenues from the people that we put back to work to balance our budget over the decade.
Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you. We absolutely need a balanced approach to getting us out of this financial crisis. We need to just gather around, talk, work together, and we can make it happen. But with the right priorities, we don't have to cut so deeply that it's going to impact middle-class families and those who are struggling. I don't support balancing the budget on the backs of the needy or impacting our seniors who are so reliant on Social Security and Medicare. We do need to find smarter, more efficient ways to do things, close tax loopholes, review tax expenditures, just like we've done in Oregon. We need to end the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest and tax benefits for individuals, corporations, and industries that don't need them. And these are the first steps that we need to take, but I want to make it clear that we do need to make sure that we're standing up for the most vulnerable, getting people back to work so that they can provide for their families. It is a matter of priorities. I'm going to get to work and get the work done. Thank you.
The next question goes first to Mr. Witt and then to Ms. Bonamici. The President is proposing $320 billion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid over 10 years. While reductions amount to less than 3% of what will be spent on these programs in the next decade, some of the cuts would affect very low-income elderly and would also shift more Medicaid costs to the states. What is your position on this proposal?
Cutting benefits to those who are dependent upon a program is the wrong approach to balancing our Medicare issue. The chief problem with Medicare is the cost that Medicare prescription drug recipients are ending up having to pay, or that our government pays on their behalf. In 2003, the Bush administration negotiated a deal with our nation's drug companies that requires our federal government to pay retail prices for Medicare drug prescriptions. We all know that eggs are cheaper by the dozen, and with literally tens of millions of Medicare drug prescriptions, our federal government should be negotiating the very best price that is possible to achieve for the cost of those drugs. By doing so, we can eliminate all of the problems with funding of Medicare and not have to cut any of the programs for any of the recipients.
Oh, I think I saw. Let me restate the question briefly. The President is proposing $320 billion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, and the fact is it would affect very low-income elderly and shift more Medicaid to the states. Your position on that proposal? Mr. Witt, you have 45 seconds to do a redo.
I am opposed to that proposal for the very reasons that I explained earlier, that it is inappropriate to cut programs when we can adjust the cost simply by adjusting and negotiating a better price. The federal government can negotiate on the basis of literally tens of millions of Medicare drug prescriptions and make our government a price setter rather than a price taker for Medicare drug prescriptions. So I am opposed to the program.
Ms. Bonamici, into the Bramblebush.
Thank you. I'm also opposed to that proposal. It's not our seniors who are responsible for the financial crisis that we're in, and I don't want to make cuts that will impact their ability to get health care and to survive. And I agree with Representative Witt that we need to do what we've done at the state level in terms of reducing the cost of prescription drugs. We have a prescription drug purchasing pool here where we're using the power of buying in bulk. We absolutely need to be doing that at the federal level so that we get better drug prices and prescription prices. And we also need to be focusing on better rates of reimbursement for our physicians so that more physicians will take Medicare patients. It is not the responsibility of the seniors. I am not interested in solving this problem by balancing the budget on their backs.
Mr. Avakian.
I oppose the proposal too. Instead of pulling the rug out from underneath our seniors and most vulnerable at a time when it's difficult to find help anywhere else, let's look at better reimbursement rates for physicians. Let's allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Let's create a public option for Medicare Part D. And here's another one that may end up being the most important reform we could make. Let's move to better prevention for the young people in the country, for end-of-life care, so we can decrease the cost of medical care, and over a longer period of time, smooth out the bumps that we have with a system that is really quite expensive now. And in the end, then, will be both less expensive, provide better care, and better reimbursement for physicians.
A question for Ms. Bonamici and followed by Mr. Avakian. The war in Afghanistan has been going on for 10 years now. Public support for the war is waning, and even military leaders acknowledge that we are unlikely to achieve our original goals. Some have argued that the best course of action is to negotiate with the Taliban, bring them into the political system, and withdraw our troops. Would you agree with such a strategy? And if not, what do you see as a responsible way forward?
I believe we need to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan as soon as possible. I don't support leaving troops there except what's needed there for security. But we absolutely need to return the troops home as soon as possible. There's been conflict in Afghanistan for centuries, and we aren't solving problems by being there. So let's bring the troops home right away.
Avakian.
Questions?
I'm sorry. I see 3 question marks up. So Ms. Bonamici, the question is, the best course of action has been suggested to negotiate with the Taliban, bring them into the system, withdraw our troops. Would you agree with that strategy or not? And if not, what do you see as a responsible way forward?
I agree that we need to withdraw the troops. I don't agree that we should be negotiating with terrorists.
Mr. Avakian.
I do not agree with the strategy. Earlier, when I said bring the troops home and bring them home now, that is exactly what I meant. 5 years ago, I think it was smart to build some kind of a transition plan that helped stabilize that country, that protected our troops and protected our country as well, and slowly transition out. Now we've been in this conflict longer than any in the nation's history without a real end in sight, and I am not persuaded that 2 years from now, that country nor ours will be in any better position than we are now. So I say pack up the troops immediately and bring all of them home.
Mr. Witt.
I would oppose negotiations with the Taliban because as a professional negotiator, I know that you can only negotiate with someone who has the power and authority to conclude an agreement, and the Taliban represent no particular country. So there is no ultimate contract or agreement that could be reached there. What we need to do is train the Afghan army to be able to secure its own national interest and its own national security and protections, and then withdraw our troops at the very earliest opportunity and use the money that we save to invest back in America's infrastructure.
Thank you. Next question is from Mr. Avakian. When the United Nations granted Israel the right to statehood in 1949, its resolution called for 2 states, one Jewish and one Palestinian. Palestine has now petitioned the UN for statehood recognition, but the Obama administration has stated that the U.S. will veto that petition in the Security Council. In your view, is long-standing U.S. policy of unwavering support for Israel still valid, or does it reinforce the Muslim worldview that America is biased against Muslim interests?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think it's very important to recognize the allies that you have historically had, and I think the President is making the right move with the veto. The reason, though, is this. I believe in a 2-state solution between Israel and Palestine. I think you can start with a negotiation around adopting the 1967 boundaries, but what cannot be done is to have an outside group impose a resolution on those 2 parties without both of them asking for it and accepting it. And that's why the United Nations action will not work, and I think the veto is smart, and that continued negotiation between the parties, like has historically been the process that the United States has engaged in, is the proper way to continue that discussion.
Mr. Witt? Oh, I beg your pardon. I saw question marks. So the question is, in your view, is longstanding U.S. policy of unwavering support for Israel valid, or does it reinforce the Muslim worldview that we are biased against their interests?
Well, the answer is neither. The answer is that the way that we have worked in the past is to try and bring the two groups together to a resolution that is acceptable to both, and therefore to provide peace to the region. So the answer is neither.
Now, Mr. Witt, if you would.
Thank you. As an absolute supporter of Israel and the Jewish state, and someone who has been to Israel to observe firsthand Israeli and Palestinian relations, I am absolutely convinced that there will never be a just and lasting peace in that region unless and until there is a two-state solution. And I do believe that in the absence of the creation of a Palestinian state, that our nation opens itself to criticism not only by other entities in that region, but the rest of the world, that we are perpetuating all the hostile relations that are taking place there.
Ms. Bonamici.
This country has been a strong supporter of Israel, and I believe it needs to continue to be a strong supporter of Israel. But I also believe in a two-state solution. Primarily, the first thing we need to look at is security for both Israel and for the Palestinian people. We need to make sure that they can be safe and secure where they live. I've also been to Israel and seen what it's like to live there, to see what it's like to have a family with a bomb shelter in a home, to walk around a market where the day before there's been a bombing. So I know what it's like for the people who live there to live in that insecurity. But I also know that any sort of peace will only come from relationship building within the country, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Yes, the United States needs to continue to support Israel. We need to be a leader in facilitating those negotiations, but lasting peace will only come from within the country.
I see question marks again, Ms. Bonamici. The question again is U.S. policy of support for Israel still valid, or does it reinforce the Muslim view that we are biased against their interests?
U.S. support for Israel still is valid, and I don't believe that it reinforces Muslim views of the world. I believe what reinforces Muslim views of the world are opinions from other people and misinformation. I believe that the United States is a leader in helping to facilitate peace, but as I said before, peace is going to need to come within the country between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
From the Middle East to East Asia, a question for Mr. Witt, followed by Ms. Bonamici. China's fortunes and economic dominance in East Asia have increased dramatically, while the relative importance of the American market is declining. China could shortly challenge the United States for superpower status and could overtake our economy. Is there anything the U.S. could or should do to affect or prevent China's potential global economic dominance? And if so, what?
That's a very multifaceted question. The first thing that we need to do is take care of matters at home, and we must make the United States economy the most competitive economy in the world. And again, as I stated earlier, the way that we revive our economy presently and the way that we guarantee economic success, prosperity, and strength out into the future is to invest in our nation's infrastructure. In terms of global hegemony and the United States' ability to project itself internationally, it's critically important that as we grow our economy, we also enter into discussions and relations, both political as well as economic, with China. There's no question, but with that country, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bonamici, your response.
Thank you, Jim. It's a very timely question. I just saw in the paper today that Nike's planning to open a big campus in China, in Shanghai. I believe that we absolutely need to make revitalizing our economy job number one. We need to, again, become a leader in the world. And when I see what's happening in Congress, and as you mentioned earlier, the low regard and the low esteem that in which members of Congress are held, we need to make a step to change that. I can bring leadership to Congress with an effective record of getting things done. We need to rebuild our reputation as a leader, and we need to absolutely get back on track by creating jobs through helping small businesses get access to capital, rebuilding infrastructure, improving our schools. And when we do those things that I'm working on in the state legislature that I will continue to work on in Congress, when we do those things, we'll revitalize our economy and once again become a leader in the world. We will be having a global relationship with China. That won't end, but we can be strong.
Thank you.
Thank you
Mr.
for the
Avakian.
question. Your question gets right at the point of why I have taken such a definitive stance on trade policy for this country. We cannot compete with China if we continue sending our jobs to them, especially out of our manufacturing base. This country has never been stronger than during the times when we had a strong middle class with the purchasing power to buy American goods from American companies. And we will not be strong and competitive like we used to be if we continue ripping that away from the middle class by sending jobs overseas. So we need trade policies that put us on an equal competitive playing field with every country, including China. The second is this: the United States must take strong action to oppose any manipulation of foreign currency by other countries that put us at a competitive disadvantage.
Thank you. Well, enough of these moderator questions. We've completed this portion of the program. Now we go to the portion where each candidate in turn, beginning with Mr. Witt, interrogates one other candidate with a question for 30 seconds. The person asked the question then has 60 seconds to respond, and then the interrogator has another 30 seconds for a rebuttal. So we'll go Mr. Witt first, then Ms. Bonamici, then Mr. Avakian. So Mr. Witt, please have at it.
Thank you. Senator Bonamici, you know that I am both a state representative and a labor representative. And for many of my counterparts in Columbia, they face the possibility of being executed simply for trying to represent the interests of working class people. On an average, one trade unionist is executed each and every week in Columbia. Would you support the Colombian Free Trade Agreement?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. I have set forth the criteria that I will consider in looking at trade agreements. And what I'm very concerned about in Colombia is the violence. And I would want to make sure that any trade agreement had provisions in it that strengthened the protections for those trying to form a union. I have been a strong supporter of collective bargaining rights and the rights to form a union in the state legislature, and I would be looking very carefully at those provisions to make sure that they address worker freedom to join a union and that they have provisions to address the violence in Colombia. It's a great concern to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am very satisfied with the Senator's response.
Maybe the interrogator of the candidate of your choice. 30 seconds of questioning, please.
Thank you, Jim. Commissioner Avakian, you sort of have a disadvantage here. Representative Witt and I are both ducks. And you're a beaver, so what?
Disadvantage.
What is your plan to get the Beaver Nation back on track after what happened in Eugene last night?
We'll see you on the baseball diamond in spring.
The applause on that one. No rebuttal, I take it, Ms. Bottom. You may. Have 30
Yes,
seconds.
I will. I will rebut that because I'm from Detroit and the Tigers won last night, so.
Mr. Avakian, your question to the candidate of your choosing.
Suzanne, in the rush of the campaigns, Sometimes we overlook the kind of personal stories that help voters get to know us a little bit. Let me give you an example. I know that nobody here would possibly believe it, but many years ago I was actually a wrestler at Oregon State University. It's true. Suzanne, what's a fact about you that you think would be interesting for people to know out there that they don't already know about you? And I will defer my rebuttal time to Representative Witt so he can answer the question too.
Ms. Bonamici.
Well, there are a few people who know this, but now everybody will know this. I actually sing. And last year, the Senate Democratic Leadership Fund had a fundraiser, and I sang some songs in the mode of capital steps that I had put together to bring some levity and humor to what was otherwise a Senate Democratic Leadership fundraiser. So I've been known to actually rewrite lyrics to songs and sing them, not exactly in public, but in front of other people.
Mr. Witt, your opportunity to channel Mr. Avakian, if you care to respond.
Is this rebuttal or?
You have the podium. Yes. Anything you'd care to say? Ms. Bonamici's.
Commissioner Avakian,
No,
do you
it's
think
not a question? No, I'm sorry. This is not a question. You're simply where Mr. Avakian had given you his 30-second rebuttal time if you wanted it, but you'll pass on that very well.
I think the clock has run out.
Sorry to confuse you candidates. I told you any screw-ups were mine, and they are. I apologize. But we are now going, after that little interlude we had, to the closing statements. And we'll begin with 2 minutes of closing statements from each candidate. First from Mr. Avakian, then Mr. Witt, and then Ms. Bonamici, and then we will indeed thank you with our applause. So, Mr. Avakian, you may begin with your 2 minutes closing.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Westwood. I want to thank Brad and Suzanne, both of whom are friends, for joining the race and for participating in the debate today, and the Portland City Club for hosting what I think has just been a great public discussion. We've done a lot of talking about jobs today. My family taught me a lot about what a job means. My grandfather, Avakian, fled genocide and oppression in Armenia in 1898 to come to America and build a better life for himself and his family. He was a carpenter. When he got here, he had a big family. 7 of his sons became carpenters or electricians. I remember my dad driving my brother and I through the streets of Fresno when we were young, and he'd say, "You see that neighborhood over there? That neighborhood was built by your grandfather and your uncles." And families were still living in the houses, and kids were still playing in the yards. I remember standing in the church where my parents were married and where I was baptized, and knowing that it was built by my family for the community. You see, a job isn't just about making money for yourself, although we know that's important. It's about who we are and how we choose to give back to the world. It's about how we build our families, our communities, and our country. And that's why we need those shop classes back, and it's why Congress needs to get off its hands and put our people back to work again. Listen, I'm a guy that rolls up his sleeves, I work hard, and I get the job done. I've done it all my life here in Northwest Oregon, from the days when I was a young boy picking every Washington County berry field to my days now helping train Oregon's workforce as your Commissioner of Labor and Industries. Right now, I'm working hard to earn your vote. My name is Brad Avakian. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your support.
Mr. Witt.
Thank you. And thank you to the Portland City Club, all of its members, friends, and guests. I appreciate, once again, the opportunity to have been able to present to you my candidacy today for Oregon's 1st Congressional District. I have shared with you this afternoon my vision and my commitments for a better Oregon and for a better America. From jobs to education, healthy choices to a healthy environment, sound retirements to sound foreign policy. I have also shared honestly and forthrightly with you my values as a fellow Oregonian. I have told you how my Rebuild America program will put unemployed Americans back to work, rebuild our nation's infrastructure, and in the process, get our economy back on track. I have also shared with you some tough political challenges, because tough challenges, the ability to craft a sound legislative response to them, and to then bring about compromises and agreements are the signs of strong, effective, and principled leadership. Oregon is in dire need of that leadership. The 1st Congressional District is the only one among 435 without a voice. And I so truly want to be that voice and that advocate. I truly want to be the next congressman from Oregon. And I ask each and every one of you here today, as well as our listening guests, please support not only my vision, my agenda, but also my values for the next congressman from the state of Oregon. I look forward to your vote on November 8th. I'm Brad Witt. Thank you very much.
Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you. Thank you to the City Club, to those of you who are here today, and those who are listening on the broadcast. Today was a great opportunity for the three of us to share our views. But let me make clear, this election is about more than the three of us as candidates. It's about all Oregonians who right now are struggling just to get by, to provide for themselves and their families in these difficult economic times. And it's about those who work hard and play by the rules but are feeling insecure about their retirement, the future of their children, and the direction of our country. This special election comes at a time when people are losing faith in Congress. And worse, we're running out of time to restore that faith. At this moment in history, I have something to offer. My record and my reputation are based on the ability to get things done without being divisive or offensive. And I will never forget, even as I wade through all the complicated parts of legislation, that I'll be making decisions that are affecting people's lives. I've never lost sight of that. It's how I've conducted myself throughout my entire career, and it's exactly what Congress needs right now. We must put aside our differences and come together in every way that we can to renew a sense of progress and faith in our country. If my grandparents were here today, I believe that they would say that we the people is more than just a concept. It's something that we live each and every day. For Ferdinando and Leonetta Bonamici, it was worth crossing the ocean for. And for us, it's worth fighting for now. So for past generations and for future generations, please don't forget that it's often the most important outcomes that are dependent on simple things, like remembering to vote. This is a critical moment not only for our economic future, but for our democratic future. Voting is indeed the fundamental act of continued faith in our democracy, and I'm respectfully asking for your vote. Thank you.
As our President Melody Rose returns to the stage, let's join everyone here in thanking our candidates for being here.
I'd like to thank all of the participants here today and listening for yet another incomparable, time-honored City Club debate. I want to thank our Truth Squad members, Joyce DeMonin, Elizabeth Friedenwald, and Promise King. Thank you also to our timekeeper, Tony Yacarino. A special thank you to our moderator, Jim Westwood. And of course, our deepest appreciation to our debaters, Brad Avakian, Suzanne Bonamici, and Brad Witt. Please join us next week when Steve Bass of OPB will be here to talk to us about the importance of public broadcasting. Thank you. We are adjourned.